In this video, I'm going to be checking whether the KTM chain slack spec for my 2024 300 EXC is okay or not. Here you can see the published specification for chain tension in the KTM owner's manual for my 2024 300 EXC. It's listed as a minimum of 55 millimeters and maximum of 58. The method is to put the bike on a work stand and then pull the chain up and measure the distance from the swing arm to the lower part of the chain, which is indicated as A on the diagram. So why is chain tension important? Well, if it's too tight, it can cause a lot of wear on the chain. The sprockets, the rear wheel bearings can wear quickly, and also the countershaft oil seal can start leaking. And in extreme cases, the swing arm pivot, which goes through the cases here, can cause a lot of strain on the engine cases and crack the cases in this area. If the chain is too loose, it will be noisy and can also derail easily, which causes issues, especially if it gets jammed in the case area here. It can be very difficult to extract and also cause damage to your clutch slave. So it's really important to have the chain tension adjusted correctly. When measuring chain tension, I find it easiest to use some calipers like this, and I use the depth gauge part of the calipers to perform the measurement. So right now the bike's on a work stand. I pull the chain up, I position the calipers at this position on the swing arm, and then I measure up to the lower section of the chain. Right now I've set the tension to the minimum spec of 55 millimeters. And you might well ask why you need this much slack. Well, if the swing arm pivoted about the counter shaft, as the rear wheel moved up and down in travel, the chain tension would not change, and you wouldn't need this much slack at all. However, on the KTM bikes, the swing arm pivot is actually in this location here, behind this cover, so it's behind the counter shaft point. So as the rear wheel moves up and down, the chain tension will actually change. So the maximum tension will be when the counter shaft, the swing arm pivot, and the rear axle are in alignment. Right now it's on a stand, the wheel is dropped down, so it's loose. As it moves up and they become aligned, the chain tension will increase and the amount of slack will reduce. To check whether it's okay, you can remove the shock absorber and then manually move the rear wheel up and down and check the tension. And when everything is in alignment, you should make sure that it doesn't bind and there's not a lot of pressure on the chain. So I'm going to take the rear shock off and check that. Okay, so I've removed the rear shock, and right now the rear wheel is dropped right down, and you can see there's loads of slack. As I move it up, around here is probably the central point, and there is minimal slack. It's quite taut. I carry on moving up to the top, and there's some slack there. It doesn't feel like it's binding, although it does get quite tight. So I would say the minimum spec really is the minimum, and you wouldn't want to go any tighter than that, certainly. Okay, so I have the rear shock back in. I've adjusted the chain tension to the maximum spec of 58 millimeters, and I'm going to take the rear shock out again and check how much slack there is when everything is in alignment. Okay, so I've removed the rear shock again, and it's on the maximum adjustment of 58 millimeters. So I'm going to start moving up, and that is probably close to alignment, and there's more play than before, certainly. And go up to full, and you can see there's a lot more play as well. Okay, so we've seen that the travel does not bind even if you set the chain spec to minimum. However, one consideration when you're actually riding the bike, especially if you're riding in muddy conditions or sandy conditions, you can get build up between the sprockets and the chain, which increases tension. So certainly if you're riding in muddy conditions, I would not set the chain tension to the minimum spec. I would set it to the maximum, and I think you'll be fine with that. If it's clean conditions, even on the minimum, is not going to damage anything or create excessive wear. One reason I made this video is someone called Speed Demon Express commented on a previous video I'd made, which was of a Riding Buddies TPI, which had the cases cracked in this area. That was due to excessive chain tension. He basically had no slack at all, put a lot of force on the swing arm pivot and cracked the cases. I'll put a link in the description of this video in case you want to watch that one. He mentioned that on late model bikes, the KTM chain slack spec is incorrect, and that if you have less than 67 millimeters of chain slack, you'll get binding when you move the rear wheel up and down. On my 2024, I've shown that not to be the case, and that even with the KTM minimum spec, it doesn't bind as such, although it is quite tight, and I would definitely call that a minimum spec. I personally would veer on the side of the maximum spec, especially for riding in muddy or sandy conditions. One other consideration which I should also note is the sliders you're using. I'm using aftermarket ones. If they become worn or if they're brand new, there will be some difference in the slack. So I recommend that you check all that and do your own measurement and make sure that you don't have excessive chain tension, and perform your measurement carefully, because it can be very important for reducing wear and damage to the bike. Certainly, if you're unsure, veer on the side of the maximum specification, and you should have no problems.